This lecture was designed in order to give you a sense of how to write. Now, this might be a tad insulting to most of you because you already know how to write in some ways. Everybody knows how to construct sentences. Everybody knows how to put words together so that something coherent can come about. You have made sentences ever since you were maybe in grade 1, maybe. Okay, below that, maybe you guys were not great in making sentences. You simply had to learn a few words, how to patch them up together, but not a meaningful construction of the sentences. So it is difficult for me to understand how to teach, how to write sentences without sounding a tad insulting. Okay, so I thought that I would not show you my writing because I'm not an accomplished author as of now. The hopes that something like that might happen are there. I want to stand today, as Newton said, on the shoulders of the giants and give you a sense of how to write beautiful sentences and giving you a few examples as to some of the most ravishing sentences written by other writers. As I always say, the introduction gives away as to what you're writing. Say you're writing about black holes. You've got to write something daringly original, not something that you've always heard from somewhere. Most of the times when I received some of the writing, some of them wrote, black holes are so mysterious that nothing, not even light can escape. That is something that everybody knows. You're not adding anything into it. There are a few Zen masters who say that if you write something like that, it's adding a sixth finger. What that means is you already have 5 fingers. These are functioning really well. And if you're writing black holes or something that just eats up everything, you're not really adding to anything. You're trying to add in a 6th finger, which is not really necessary. In other ways, they also say that it's like adding legs on a snake. A snake is already crawling. You don't want more legs added into it. So writing like that would be akin to what Zen masters already said, or they sometimes tend to say adding frost to snow. Snow is already there. Frost is something that you can get rid of. Do you know this man? Have you ever seen the picture of this? Sudeep, do you have any chance? Sony? No? This is a great gentleman, one of my favorite writers of them all. His name is Vladimir Nabokov. Have you heard of Nabokov somewhere? Have you heard the word Lolita somewhere? Maybe. Yes, yes. So he's the writer of that great book Lolita, which was quite scandalous when it came out, because it was about Humbert Humbert, a certain 40 years old man who assaulted a little girl by the name of Dolores Hayes, and later said, no, we two were simply loving each other, when it was sexually assaulting in a lot of ways. So if you read Lolita, for instance, the introductory lines go something like, Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins. Do you know what the word loin is? Loin refers to your sexual organs. So it says, Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins. So he starts off in that manner. It gives you a sense of something that is coming about, and something great, something related to love, and something related to physical love might come about. So these are 3 sentences. Lolita, full stop. Light of my life, full stop. Fire of my loins. So these are 3 sentences. So sometimes even a word can act as a sentence. I mean, we've all heard that words such as sit, come, go can work as a sentence on their own. But if you know how to project it, a word such as Lolita might make a sentence on its own as well. Nabokov also has a great collection of love letters if you want to read it someday. These are known as letters to Vera, Vera referring to his wife. Now, it so happened that Nabokov was born during the Russian Revolution. Okay, the Russian Revolution was on its height. His father was an aristocratic figure. And in Russia, that was later to transition into Soviet, it was said that we'll throw away all the aristocracy. All the rich people are going to go, and all the poor are going to get. All the peasants, all the proletariat people, the working class people are going to rule the country. That's how the idea of the Soviet Union came to be. And since his father was an aristocratic figure, he also was aristocratic, and he had to flee Russia. And around 18 years of age, when his father died, suddenly he became a millionaire. But then again, the very next day, he became a mendicant again, because the Russian Revolution took all of his property away from him. They said, no, nothing belongs to one person. Everything goes out to the Russian country, as it were. So he became a millionaire, and overnight he lost all that money just to become a beggar again. And his life was, I wouldn't say very traumatic, but it was certainly something that was full of fleeing away from Russia. So he lived sometimes in Paris, giving lectures on Russian literature, writing Russian books, poetry, things like that. Sometimes he had to go to Germany and do the same thing. And it was a life of traveling too much. And he eventually went to Harvard University and became a professor of Russian literature. He was also a great person who had a lot of knowledge about butterflies. So if you read many of Nabokov's books, there are a lot of allusions to butterflies and things that he was really interested in. Now, since somebody who was bred in some ways in Harvard shouldn't have a very difficult life, or so we assume. And that was the case with Nabokov. But you've got to know that Nabokov's wife, Vera, was a Jewish, and there were pogroms against Jewish just to kill all of the Jewish population. Hitler called it the final solution. If you read the Second World War, you must have some idea about it. So there are beautiful letters that Nabokov has written to his wife. In one of the letters he says, "You came into my life not as one would come into your life, say, donning the hat, but as if you came into a kingdom where all the rivers had been waiting for your reflection, all the roads had been waiting for you to come about." So that's another of the wonderful sentences that Nabokov can sometimes carve up. If you read Lolita very carefully, he has a wonderful sentence where he said, you must all have heard love at first sight. Have you heard this expression, love at first sight? It was love at first sight, Poilo bet me maya bosio, something like this. Nabokov does something better in Lolita, where he says, it was not simply love at first sight. He says, it was love at first sight, it was love at last sight, it was love at forever and ever sight. So in essence, he's trying to say something that's out of the ordinary, out of the cliches. So how can you make something that you always heard and turn this into a sentence of your own is an art you can master. If you read the first letter that Nabokov wrote to Vera, and since books are very difficult to find in our country, you wouldn't find letters to Vera too much, but if you go to the internet, the same place where I gave you a few books to review, you can read a few of his letters and you can see that his endearments are very, very different. He simply doesn't say if you've read a few letters, I'm bottom letter lekhna sikaउँथे नि प्यारो यो म सन्चै छु तिमी पनि सन्चै होला भन्ने आशा छ. Like, and it doesn't flow like that. All of his letters are so different from one another. There are very many endearings he uses, okay? Sometimes he says, I'm not simply thinking about you, I'm living about you. And that gives you a sense that there is a force, a vitality in the letters. So if you read some of his endearments, sometimes he calls his lady Sparrowling, sometimes he calls her kid, sometimes he calls her kidlet, sometimes he says, my old man, I'm missing you too much. So giving you a sense that out of even the ordinary phrases that you use, you can make very different things out of it and make it as beautiful as it can. Have you ever read this novel, 11 Minutes? It's another, you've read Paulo Coelho someday. You've heard of the name, right? Alchemist? Anybody has heard of the book, Alchemist? No? Not really? Okay, Paulo Coelho is one of the great figures that exists in the literary community. He's somebody from Brazil, writes, I think in the Spanish or Portuguese language. I'm really not sure. And he's got this, he's got these series of books that have an element of self-help about it. although I'm not really keen at the idea of self-help, but his books are sometimes thought to be helping the people too much. And so he's got a great following, as it were. Alchemist is about Santiago, a person who is chasing after his dream. And it encourages the reader to pursue their dreams and follow their dreams in some ways. So he has these series of books where people are really lost in a particular point in time, don't feel that they're in one with the world or their surroundings or others. And the books are a sense of how these characters find themselves, how they find joy in life, and how they connect with other people. He wrote a lot of books like these, and we know that self-help books are really don't really draw out a lot of criticism from a lot of people, because most people can read it. It's in very simple language, which are some of the reasons why some people tend to look down upon Paulo Coelho and say, these books are very trashy, they're so easy, nobody should write it that way. So after writing a horde of books related to helping oneself out, he wrote a strange novel, strange in what ways I'll explain later, 11 Minutes. And this became to be one of the more controversial books that he wrote. The reason it became controversial is because the title 11 Minutes is given because according to the author, 11 minutes is roughly the time that people have sex. Okay? So once you're in a sexual encounter, it roughly takes around 11 minutes to get home. Or at least that's what the author says. He wanted in this book not to write primarily about sex, but write about how a prostitute can also feel very, very out of place. And this is a very touchy subject to a lot of people, because we tend to read in self-help books how there was a person who overcame a lot of difficulties, became a millionaire or a billionaire, and then we're done. And so there are a few things about those people. What are some of the difficulties they encountered, and that's all. He said, look, if I don't write about difficult subjects like these, such as sex, such as a prostitute, maybe I'll not be doing all that greater service to the writing community. So he said, let's write a book about prostitute, 11 minutes. And 11 minutes, I am very bad at this. Still beginning. So here, read the introductory sentence of 11 minutes. It is one of the most ravishing ones that I've ever read. Once upon a time, there was a prostitute named Maria. And then he goes on to say, no. Once upon a time is how all the best children's storybooks really start. Okay? And prostitute is a word for the adults. How can we somehow reconcile these apparent contradictions? And then he says, look, we all have a part in ourselves which is quite childish. No matter how old you get, you always feel you're young. You ask really old people, they say, I feel exactly like I felt about when I was in grade 10 or 11. I have that vitality in me, or I have that childlike quality in me. And if you listen very carefully to even children, they'll have pronouncements which are sage-like. They can be very intellectual in some ways. I remember the son of one of my great writers, Christopher Hitchens. They once went to a restaurant in order to eat, and they were waiting around for people to come and ask for orders. And the child said, Daddy, why are they called waiters? It's we who are doing all the waiting. So maybe we're the waiters. And it just gives you a sense of, if a child can be very honest, he gives you opinions that you've never really heard, makes your brain bend in some ways, and asks you to think about it more. So if you take a look at a sentence like this, it's quite a simple sentence. Once upon a time. So the writer has taken something that's known as once upon a time, which is used all of the time, and turned it into something really different. something that gives you a sense of gravity of the situation at hand. And at the same time, he tries to become a bit facetious, childlike, playful in some ways in writing. So whenever you're writing something, you can take all of the elements that you always had and make it into something more beautiful. Okay? Do you recognize this figure? Anybody? Nobody? So this is another of the great figures in the form of writing, and his name is George Orwell. Have you ever heard the name George Orwell? Have you ever read essays about Orwell? No? Not really? Orwell was one of the great journalists of the century that's gone by. So in the 20th century, George Orwell was one of the most prominent writers there ever was. He's one of the greatest essayists. He's considered to be the greatest essayist of all time, and certainly a very great force in the form of writing fiction as well. His two books, Animal Farm and 1984, form basic studies of what is now known as post-colonial or colonialist literature. Orwell was a police officer. He was stationed in Burma. You know the country of Burma, right? Which is sometimes known as Myanmar as well. And Orwell was a great political writer. He wrote extremely simple sentences, but always had a great effect when it came about. One of the great sentences carved out is that people who elect corrupt politicians are not victims, they're accomplices. Do you know what the word accomplice is? Accomplice refers to somebody who becomes a partner in crime, as it were. He becomes a partner in crime in some way. So if there's anybody who elects corrupt politicians, you can't really blame other people for them, because it's the people who've elected who should have all of the blame. One of his great précis that is often used in a lot of ways and in a lot of forms as well. If there's anyone who's read Animal Farm by any chance? Anyone? No? Not really? So this is how Animal Farm really starts. Animal Farm starts with something very simple, a picture, as it were, of what is coming. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had locked the hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the pop holes. Now, you might wonder what a pop hole is. A pop hole is something like this, okay? So he was too drunk in order to forget to lock all of those pop holes. The idea of if you take a look at Animal Farm, it reflects in some ways as to another of the great figures we talked about recently, Vladimir Nabokov. Now, Nabokov was chased away from Russia by the communists. Okay, so there was this great idea in Russia that there shouldn't be people who rule over other people. So, for example, you're in a factory, you shouldn't have a boss, or you shouldn't have an employee. The distinctions between an employer and an employee should be erased away. All of the people who are working in a particular factory should have the capacity to own the factory in some ways. So the heads, the big bosses, as it were, should be thrown away. So that was the great idea. And Russia was the experimentation house for it. So if you've heard about the Women's Day, for example, it started in Russia as well. It was in Russia where women came out, marched in some parts of it. They said, we want bread, land, peace, all of those things. And it was women who led the way into the Russian Revolution. And when the revolution came about, they threw away all the employers, as it were. They were referred to as the kulaks, the people who owned the smaller people. So they tried to kill all of them, overthrow all of them away, so that all of the proletariats would rule it. But after a while, it didn't really work out all that great. And Orwell went to Russia to see all of this, and he saw what stupidities were there. And he said, let's try to write something about it. And he came up with the book Animal Farm. It's a children's story, but it's a story of revolution. It's a story of how governments can be really cruel, and how changes might be something that we need to think about really well. So the idea is that there are these two people whose names are already here, Mr. Jones and Mrs. Jones. These are the two primary figures of Animal Farm. So these are the two people who own what is known as Manor Farm. It is given out of their own names, so Manor Farm. Mr. Jones and Mrs. Jones have Manor Farm. Now, in a farm, the animals have very difficult lives. You must have visited some of the farms and you already know that it's not all that great. Animals are confined into very small spaces. They've been fed all of the time. They don't really have a community, as it were. They're stranded, tethered to a particular position. Doesn't really have a good effect on the health of the animals as well. So all of the animals that are in the farm come about and they say, let's have a revolution. These human beings are exploiting us too much. We need to have a revolution where the exploitation should end. So all of the animals come together at the behest of the pigs, who are the smartest animals in Manor Farm. And the pigs say, we've got to launch a revolution. We've got to throw away these human beings who are exploiting us. And we, all of the workers, will own the farm, and it's going to be really great. We're going to make the farm great again someday. So when the pigs come about, all the animals are excited. There is a slogan that's touted about in Manor Farm. The slogan is, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good. So we need to throw away the 2-legged people and have all of this property to ourselves. And good enough, all of the animals come together. They go to Manor's house. They throw away Chris Manor and his wife. They even fire bullets that they've acquired. And next day, when the farm is on their own, there's a big party. There's a great sense of jubilation as to a new farm is being formed, and we shall make a great example out of this. We will make sure that this farm is greater than all of the other farms that are formed by humans, and that will show humans that if only the workers, all of the workers got a say on how to run their own property, how wonderful, how paradisical, how utopian the farm might be. So again, there's the division of labor that comes about slowly. The Constitution is written up. The Constitution says you can't kill any animal. No animal can be killed. That's one of the tenets of the Constitution. Okay, there are about 10 of them, but the most central is that all animals are equal and you can't kill any animal. Now, the reason for saying that no animal shall be killed is because you already know when chicken don't lay eggs, they become in some ways useless. And people tend to eat away at them. It's the same with cows. When cows can't produce a lot of milk, they're thrown away to the butcher. So it was said, look, we won't be doing that. We will make sure that all of the animals, all of their rights are equal. And none of this is going to take place in our farm. But there is a great dream. There is a great hope and great aspiration about establishing a farm that's better than the ones that are run by humans. So all of the animals start working together. They say, we're going to build the most wonderful of the more wonderful farms. And horses are the ones who do all of the work because they're the ones with a lot of stamina, with a lot of energy. So it's the horses who are doing things. They're building, the cows are forced to produce more milk. The chickens are forced to lay more eggs. And after a while, some of the animals start thinking, well, we've been doing so much work. We were told that it was the humans who were exploiting the animals. Now, I don't know if our lives are really better compared to the past. I mean, we're doing more work, we're putting in all of this effort for what? But since they're animals, their capacities are limited. They can't form as rational thoughts as the pigs can, for example, who tend to be one of the smartest animals around. If you read the literature related to pigs, you must also know that Now, heart transplant is also going through the skin graft of pigs. It shows a layer of connection between human beings and pigs. There are also experiments done on pigs which have shown that they're not as dirty as we tend to think they are. We tend to put them in dirty places, which is why they tend to be so swinish, as is the expression. If you leave pigs as it is out in the jungle, they tend to be really clean animals, and they don't tend to gorge on the excretion of other animals as we generally think of them. Pigs have also been taught to play video games. They can do it really well. And now there is a great movement out in the West that not simply dogs and cats, but piglets can be domesticated as well. And many of them are adopting pigs in some ways. So I don't know if Orwell had all of this in mind when he wrote the book, but he depicted pigs as the smartest of them all. Pigs are the brains behind all of them. So when the cow is giving extra milk, or when in the farm a few mangoes drop more than usual, pigs say, we need all of that milk. We need all of the eggs, and we need all of the mangoes. Because look, we're doing all of the paperwork. We're planning how to do this, and this takes a lot of effort. Don't you realize? You other animals don't have a lot of idea about it because your thinking capacities are limited. But as pigs, we really know this is difficult. So all the meat to us, all the eggs to us, all the mangoes to us. And after a while, what happens is that there is a small congregation of chicken who start to revolt and say, look, we don't really want to give our babies away in the form of eggs. We don't want to do it. And so when the chickens start to protest, the pigs come about, marshal other animals and say, look, these are against our principles. We're trying to establish the biggest farm there is. We're trying to make examples out of people that we can make a farm just out of animals. But these are the chickens who are wasting our time with such cries. Let's kill them. And so they build a consensus, and the Constitution is amended. And the Constitution says, no animal shall be killed without a reason. Now that somebody has a reason, you can kill animals too. So something like this happens. The animals are producing more and more milk. Yes, they have acquired a lot of land as well. They trade with other farms, and they've acquired a big sort of land, and they're building all of these new technologies. But all the animals are working more and more and more. And every year this reflection dawns on them whether we're doing the right thing. But as I said earlier, they're not smart enough to rationalize all of these or come together or launch a revolution like previously. And what once happens is that Mr. and Mrs. Jones, who used to live of the farm, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, who previously owned the farm, used to live in very comfortable beds in very comfortable housing. And all of the animals had decided when the revolution came about, that we shall abandon that. All animals shall sleep on the floor, and that no animal should be sleeping in something as hideous or something as comfortable as that. So since they'd thrown all of that away, they'd given up all of the gambling and all of the drinking and all of these things that we associate with big bosses. Around the end of the novel, what happens is that there's a great sense of partying that other animals have. And they want to know where this partying is taking place. The partying, the carousal, the dancing about, and all the ululations that come about when somebody's drinking or smoking is there inside the farm, and they want to go and see where all of this is happening. We thought we'd given that up all away when we did the revolution. So all the sounds tend to come from Mannor's house, where Mr. and Mrs. Jones really lived. And when other animals came to see what's happening inside there, they're peeping through the hole in the door. And they see that the pigs and the animals are dancing together. They're drinking together, they're smoking together. And this takes a lot of animals by surprise. What is this? We thought that 2 legs was bad and 4 legs was good, but here are pigs who are dancing and partying around with the 4-legged one, with the 2-legged ones. And the constitution that was drafted, there's another of the changes that comes in the constitution, and it's been written, all animals are equal, but, again, as the amendment of the previous one, which said, no animal shall be killed, but they added the extra syllables without any reason. In the same way, all animals are equal. One of the principal tenets of the Constitution is amended, and it says all animals equal, but some animals are more equal than other animals. And it gives you a sense that pigs wanted to establish themselves up the hierarchy, kill other people, and all wanted to give a sense that every revolution is like this. Every revolutionary comes about and says, I have all of the answers. But if you give him power too much, the revolutionary himself turns into an aristocrat, a bully in some way. So you've got to be very careful. And you could say that the revolution in Nepal was something like that too. It was inspired by the idea of communism, that all of them shall be equal, no one shall be big or small. But if you take a look at the indices in our country, you could see that the gaps between the very rich and the very poor are increasing every day. It's the same in every other developing country, such as India, where you see extreme poverty, but you see billionaires as well. If you go to Bangladesh, for example, you'd see this even more. There is such level of poverty that perhaps we can't even imagine. Do you know that this great writer, Professor Yunus, is now under arrest in Bangladesh? The one who won the Nobel Prize? No? Who started this concept that is known as Grameen Bank? Well, in some parts of Bangladesh, it is the case that people can't even take loan of 50 rupees or 20 rupees. That's how miserable some of the population is. So whenever somebody's loaning out, the big people in the villages loan people out, they charge 200, 300% interest rates, which is never payable. And as a result, whole families or generation of families undergo such hideous poverty that it beggars belief. And in order to get away with this system, Professor Yunus came up with this great idea of Grameen Bank, of Grameen Hospital, and a lot of these things, where they wanted to loan out people and they didn't want... Now, see, banks are not going to give you 50 or 100 rupees worth of loan. They want, if you go to a bank and say, give me 100 rupees, everybody will laugh at you. Because we can't really imagine what it's like to be so poor that you don't even know, you can't even acquire 100 rupees from somewhere. But as I said, in parts of Bangladesh, there are people so poor that even 50 rupees or 100 rupees was not accessible to them. So Professor Yunus thought, let's form a bank where giving 100 rupees is not a big deal. Okay? Now, another of the things that happens in banks is that whenever you want to go out and get a loan, you've got to have a property in some ways. Now, those are people who don't have 100 rupees. Can you think that they'll have property? No way. So he said, look, we'll give it to you. We'll give 100 rupees, 50 rupees, whatever you demand, as long as you promise us that once your business is set and it's up and running, you'll return us the money. So that's how Grameen Bank really started. And as a result of Grameen Bank, thousands of those people, whose whole generations of families had to be under perpetual slavery, were taken out of the dregs of poverty. It was an astonishing thing. So even in places like these, you could see a lot of difference, a lot of disparity between the very rich and the very poor people. Okay, and Animal Farm is just a gentle reminder that not one revolution is enough for human beings. If you read at Animal Farm really well, there's another character. There are 3 pigs. One of the pigs are killed. And it's something that happened in Russia as well. In Russia, there were 3 prominent figures. It was Vladimir Lenin, there was Leon Trotsky, and Joseph Stalin. Now, Trotsky was, in some ways, the smartest of the 3. And Stalin thought we should kill this guy because if he's this smart, he can fool around with people in Russia. And so if you read Animal Farm, there's out of the three pigs, one of the pigs is killed by the other pig, mimicking what was going on in Russia. And Orwell said, look, the idea is very good. All people should be equal. That people who are working in the factory should have some say in the factory. They can't be. The idea is very good, but it's not being run all that well in Russia. So he wrote this delectable book, which is banned in a lot of communist countries, I must add, because people don't want to know something like this. And Trotsky put out this idea. Trotsky had this great idea of a perpetual revolution. He said, look, one revolution is not enough. The revolution should continuously go on. But the people in Russia were tired of that. They saw a lot of killings. Russia was formerly a kingdom. It was ruled by the Tsars. And since Russia had seen a lot of bloodshed, they said, no, we don't want perpetual revolution. One revolution is enough for us. So we've touched upon a few of these issues. I want to point out another of the things that was written by Orwell, and this is the introductory line of one of the great essays that he wrote, and the essay is known as A Hanging. So it was his experience of watching a person being hanged. I told you a while ago, just when the three of you were here, not the others, I told you that he was a police officer in Burma. So as a police officer, it was around the time when capital punishment was a very strong force. Any person who'd done crimes could be killed by the state. And this is the introductory sentence of that essay. It was in Burma, a sudden morning of the raids. You know what the word sodden is? Sodden? Sodden is something that has a bit of wetness in it. Okay, so they're giving you a sense of how it is. So this is the whole paragraph. It was in Burma, a sudden morning of the rains. Sickly light, like yellow tinfoil, was slanting over the high walls into the jail yard. Okay? Remember, just very simple words. A sickly light. A light that was sickly. So it builds up and it builds up, and in the end, you're talking about a person who's going to be hanged. Okay? So from the introduction, the writer is building up things. Whenever we're talking about very bad days, we tend to think of winters as very bad days. Or when you wake up in the morning, it's raining very hard. You say, it's a waste of a morning. So all of these elements are perfectly blended together in this introductory paragraph, as it were, and giving you a sense of all of the hideousness that's going to come out of it. And Orwell didn't really want the state to have the power to kill anybody. Okay, he said, "Look, we shouldn't be killing a person." So it's, if you read the essay very carefully, it is about how hard it is to watch somebody die. Okay, as a person, to watch somebody die is very, very difficult. And if you take a look at this man, for example, John Birch, and this is a photo that was taken out of New York Times. It was around the year 2003. It was found out that he and his coterie of police officers had tortured around 200 people into false confessions. And those 200 people were in the death row. Do you know what a death row is? A person has been found guilty. It's been said that he's going to die, but he's not been dead yet. He's waiting for a particular date of his execution. Okay? So it was found in around 2000, that John Berg had tortured, and his midnight crew, the other police officers along with him, had tortured around 200 people into false confessions. And after the false confessions, when the government did really find out that his and his crew, midnight crew, and it's named Midnight because all of the tortures came out during the midnight. You read the testimonies of those people who were beaten up, who were harassed at. They will tell you that the word nigger, as it said, and the 5-letter word, which we don't really speak, was spoken too much. Okay? It was a racial epithet in a lot of ways. So the midnight crew, in the dark of the midnight, perpetrated crimes that are too difficult to even talk about. And after the United States of America after a state of the United States of America found out that John Berg had done something like that, they said, no, let's not kill somebody. Let's not kill people just because they've been found guilty. We might find people guilty in a lot of different ways. Sometimes you know the word eyewitness, right? It's been so much glorified. Eyewitness. There was an eyewitness of a kind. This is a true story. There was a girl who was watching television in her home. I think this is in England. I can't really be sure, but if you read Richard Dawkins's great book, Unweaving the Rainbow, you'll have the details of this case. There was a girl who was simply watching television in her room, and a person came about, ransacked the house, and raped the girl. Okay? And then she went to the police. She said, look, our sexual assault has taken place. I want to file a report. And so it was true. The report was filed. And then a lot of prisoners were brought about just to identify who the rapist is. And 50, 100, maybe, around 50 to 100 people were presented. And there was one man. And she said, look, this is the man who raped me. I am absolutely sure this is the man who raped. Then, after a week, there was an alibi. Do you know what an alibi is? Alibi? Everybody knows what an alibi is. There was an alibi. Can you guess what the alibi might have been? Can you guess what the alibi might have been? The person who was accused of raping the girl was the same person who was on the television on a live show. So she was watching the television program. It got the picture of the person in the program got imprinted in her head, and she confused and thought that he was the rapist when the rapist was somebody else altogether. This is how even eyewitnesses can be misleading in a lot of ways. Now, since we might accidentally kill someone who's innocent, that was one of the cases that Orwell makes in A Hanging. He says, what if the person is innocent? How can you 100% be sure? Because you're hearing it's somebody else saying that this is the guilty person. So this is one of the cases that says what Orwell says and what I feel, that capital punishment shouldn't be the law of the day. This is another of the people who is seminal in the discarding of capital punishment. This is Chris Evans. Chris Evans was a person from Wales. You must have heard the country Wales, which used to be a part of the United Kingdom. And it was around the 1950s, 40s and 50s. He was accused of murdering his wife. So he came home. Not that he came home, he ran away. He ran away somewhere. It was found that his child and his wife had died. And whenever a wife tends to die, the first suspect is the husband. Says a lot about marriages, doesn't it? So, and his wife died. He had run away. He didn't come back. Maybe if he had come back, we don't really know. He didn't really come back. So there was a lot of search that went around in Wales. They eventually found the person. This is the police officers making sure that he doesn't escape. It was found out during the trial that this person had an IQ of a 12-year-old child. That was one of the things that was found out. During the trial, he said, I am not guilty. It is my neighbor who is. It is my neighbor who is. But all of the neighbors came about and said, look, this must be the guy, because they're all the time fighting. We heard it so many times. These guys were at each other's necks. He must have killed the guy. And since all of the neighbors said that there was a lot of fight, People really thought, maybe he's the guy. They killed him in around a week. So after the trial was over, maybe in a week he was killed, executed. Later, after 3 or 4 years, a case came about where a body of a dead woman was found out in the neighbors. And it was later found out that the person he was saying, the neighbor, had killed his wife, was actually the man who had murdered. And it was found out that his neighbor was a serial killer, around 4 or 5. And the person was in a death row as well. His neighbor was in a death row. And while on a death row, he confessed to have killed his wife. And it was a great shock to the people in England and Wales. And there were a lot of campaigns against this. And around 1970s or 80s, a law was passed out and said, look, we can't really be sure all of the time that we're going to kill somebody. Okay? In some of the cases, maybe it's very flagrant. For example, there was a hideous case in India that took place around a decade or so ago when a girl in a bus was sexually assaulted by 4 or 5 people. So in cases like these, in cases like those, maybe we can be absolutely sure. But there will forever be cases, even when we have clear eyewitnesses, even when we have neighbors corroborating with each other and saying that this must have killed the person, the chances of a mistake. And as a result, Orwell starts out that in a sodden morning of the rains, it was in Lower Burma, and starts off his essay, a very persuasive one, not to kill anyone. And this is one of the other great magical works by Orwell. I'm talking too much about Orwell because Orwell was a master of the first sentence in a lot of ways. He and Nabokov, 2 of these people, are the greatest first sentence writers that I've ever read. Orwell was a police officer. He was a lifelong vegetarian. He thought that we shouldn't kill animals because it is too painful, too difficult for animals to endure a fate like that. We should leave them alone. And Orwell was this police officer who stayed in Burma. Orwell was a police officer who stayed in Burma for most of his life. He saw all of those hideous things that as a police officer, that as a person from England had to do in order to keep the imperialism going. And he eventually left the police officer. He said, look, I'm not going to beat anybody. I'm not going to suppress anybody. I don't want England to control Burma. I don't want England to control India or any of these other countries. I think England should be alone, out alone. And on a morning, George Orwell gets this call from somebody and says, there is an elephant. And the elephant is on a mast. Mast refers to a state when the elephant is almost mad-like. You must have seen pictures out over the internet, or videos over the internet, where there is no way to tame the elephant. The elephant is going berserk. He is downing all of the trees, he's downing all of the houses. No person can control him. A state like that in an elephant is known as a mast. And somebody calls Orwell and says, you might need to control an elephant because the elephant controller is not there. We don't really have him. And we need to control it because if we don't, people are going to laugh at us. It is the English who have come to rule over us, but they can't do anything about an elephant. So since Orwell was there, Orwell has this assignment to tame the elephant, as it were. He doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't believe in taming of the elephants. He doesn't even believe in eating meat, let alone taming the animal. So Moulman is the name of the place. And he says, in Moulman, Lower Burma, I was hated by a large number of people. It was the only time in my life where I was important enough for something like that to happen to me. So you're only hated when you're in a very good position in order to influence a lot of people. And Orwell says something so plainly out, without a lot of trite, without sentences which are boring. I mean, he's not used any difficult words, as it were, because when I was a kid, I thought that excellent writing was all about using fancy words. If you could use words that nobody understood in a sentence, that would comprise of a great writer. But Orwell gives you a sense that you can write something that everybody knows, and very direct. And you can create a sort of effect which is rather difficult to forget. Okay? So in Lord Burma, he goes out, he sees that the elephant is there, tries to control it. Nobody can control him. I mean, the man who's supposed to be in charge of the elephant is not really there. And all of the people are jeering and hissing at Orwell and say, look at this bloody Englishman. He can't do a bloody thing about it. And since there are thousands of people who've gathered around just to watch what Orwell does, and there's a lot of sniggering going around, there's a lot of words being said about white people and the British and Orwell. So Orwell takes out his rifle and bullets through the elephant. Now, one is not going to do anything for an elephant. It's a rather large beast. You must have seen that even for humans, sometimes one bullet is not enough. I mean, Orwell was somebody who took a bullet in the throat. He went to the Spanish War that took place against the fascists of Franco. And he said, look, I'm not going to let Spain into something like this, so I'll fight for Spain. Orwell doesn't know how to fire a bullet, but goes to Spain in order to fight. He was a laughable character in some ways. Whilst he's never fired a bullet in his life, but has a machine gun with him and strolling around places of Spain just to fight the fascists. He takes a bullet in his throat. The bullet just rips through the throat and goes backwards. Doesn't die, but can't speak in the same way as he previously did. And when the doctor came up to him and all was alive and fine, I mean, his voice was not the same after the bullet, but he was alive and fine. The doctor comes up to him and says, you've been so lucky, nothing happened to you. And Orwell says, well, if I was lucky, a bullet wouldn't have hit me in the first place. I'm not so lucky as you think, smarty pants. Showing that if you could talk like a child, honestly, you could achieve great things. And sometimes it's been said that if you can be a very good speaker, you can be a very good writer as well. Because if nobody wants to listen to you, why would anybody want to hear what you've really written? Because you're almost inevitably being writing the same things, same thoughts that are in your head. So you can see that there are relationships between writing and speaking in some ways. So Orwell might have been a great speaker as well. Plungers the bullet through the elephant, in the elephant rather than through. Maybe it didn't get through. 1, 2, 3, 4. And all of the time he's watching this elephant slowly banging on its knees, slowly coming down to its knees and slowly succumbing to death. And it takes about 30 or 45 minutes. And the horror of those 30 and 45 minutes and the minutes before it has been captured so wonderfully in this great essay, Shooting an Elephant, written by George Orwell. And one of the great reflections, one of the very simple reflections, but when Orwell wrote it, I thought, wow, this is so wonderful. He says, for some reason, killing a large animal always seems a bit more painful than killing a small one. And I thought, he is saying what I always knew. I didn't know how to put it into words, but I always sort of knew this. Because when I kill a mosquito, I don't really feel a thing. But if I have to watch a goat being slashed or a chicken being beheaded, it's sometimes very painful. So he was in this business of writing something that was very ordinary, extremely ordinary. And since he was writing about this ordinary thing into something subliminal, it made it all the better. And this is Alan Watts. You've heard Alan Watts? Anybody? Nobody? No. He's another of those great writers. And I, for this particular lecture, wanted you to introduce you to Alan Watts because Alan Watts has written the most wonderful dedication to any book that I've read. The book, I think, is The Way of the Zen. Okay? Zen Buddhism refers to a particular sect of Buddhism that's been practiced in Japan. Not exclusive to Japan, but it developed in Japan. Now, Zen Buddhism is in a lot of ways a redundancy. Rupesh and I were working on a video of how countries were named. I think we completed this about 2 weeks or so ago. You've heard the country East Timor? No? Nobody? Anybody? Somebody? Yes, East Timor. Now, the word Timor in the Indonesian language refers to East itself. So when you're writing East Timor, it's more or less a redundancy because you're saying East. There's no sense to it. More or less like sometimes people write down young children. Children are supposed to be young. What is up with young children? Sometimes people say exactly right. Missing the point because you're writing a word too much. Sometimes people say honest truth. You've had this expression as well. I'm saying the honest truth. Truth is supposed to be honest. So you're writing a lot of redundancies in some ways. So whenever you're writing Zen Buddhism, it's redundant in a lot of ways because Zen really refers to the Sanskrit word dhyan. You've heard this word, right? Dhyan Gare. So when Buddhism was exported to China from our parts of the world, the Chinese didn't really know how to say dha because there is no way that a Chinese could do it. If it's not being practiced if it's not practicing to speak these words, much in the same way we can speak Chinese in the way Chinese would. So when the Buddhists from here went to China, they said dhyan. Since Chinese couldn't say the word dha, they said chan. So there is a part of Buddhism in China that's known as Chan Buddhism. So when Chinese then went to Japan, the Chan became Zen. So it's a history of mispronunciation, in other words. Zen Buddhism is not really a religion in the strictest of ways. Some people say that it's a religion of no religion. It doesn't really have a doctrine, as it were, what you should or shouldn't do. If you take a look at the great Zen monks, they're ordinary people walking around in ordinary clothes, living what is known as an ordinary life. That is, getting married to somebody, falling in love, maybe in the other order as well. So first maybe falling in love and then getting married and then having kids. So they're extremely ordinary people who you wouldn't know are monks in the very first place, because whenever you have the idea of a monk, you always think, somebody in the robes is wearing a big robe and he's always meditating and he's got a shaved head, razor-like. But Zen is not like that. Zen says those things are not really necessary. If I say concentrate, everybody might pull their hands like this and have all the shrugging the shoulders and scrunched up faces like this. And Zen says, I said concentrate. I didn't say put your hands like this. I simply said concentrate. So all of these other things that we're doing in the name of doing the thing that is asked of you is not necessary. So you want to be a monk who wants to meditate all of the time, has a great amount of focus. It's not necessary to wear the robes. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't get married, because you're wanting to achieve peace of mind. Not marrying is not the only way of achieving a peace of mind. You can achieve a lot of equanimity, get rid of all your ennui, even when you're at the thick of things. That's what Zen Buddhism really says. So sometimes it's said it's a religion of no religion. There's no religion at all. Zen wants to take you to a place which is a concept-less concept. Okay, a thought-less thought, in other words. How shall I put it? In Zen Buddhism, they ask you a few koans, questions which are too puzzling to answer. Okay. Once a Zen master was asked, what is the most precious thing in the world? And he said, a dead cat. And then somebody asked, why are you saying that this dead cat is the most precious thing in the world? The master says, because nobody knows what it's really worth. Nobody can put a price to the head of this dead cat. That's why it's the most precious thing in the world. Zen Buddhists also have this wonderful tradition of asking you questions that are really difficult to answer. For example, I asked to Gaurav, for instance, Gaurav, this is the sound of two hands. In Japanese, you don't have a word for clap. There is no translation of the word clap. They say it's the sound of two hands. Gaurav, what is the sound of one hand? Exactly. You don't really know now. Okay? You don't really know if a hand on its own can make a sound or not. It's phrased in a very different way as well. Say you're in a forest, okay? A person is cutting a tree. The tree falls down. You're there to listen to it. You see that there's a great amount of sound that's being made. But for example, you're not in the forest. The tree falls down. Does the tree make any noise or not? So these are Zen koans, okay? Questions which are asked to you, where your concepts, the things that you read, just take a stroll and you can't use them anymore. There's this wonderful, another of those wonderful Zen koans that I always admired. Zen monk asked me, say there's somebody who's come up to you. You have to say something to him, but you can't use words, nor can you not use words. How would you say? Don't really know. You can't use words, you can't really not use words. What is this person banging about? So in some ways, Zen Buddhism is not about the learned concepts. It asks you to have concepts on your own, do things on your own. There is no teacher in some ways. There can't be one particular teacher. Everyone can be a teacher if you want to learn from him or her. If you don't want to, even the best of teachers are not going to serve you. So might as well find your own track, find your own way. And Alan Watts wrote this great dedication of his book to Tia, Mark and John, three of his lovely kids, whom he said, you're going to understand it so much because you can't read it. Now this goes, in some ways, is parallel to sometimes when you go up to a Zen monk and you ask him, please Guru, show me the way how things are done. He says, look, nobody's taught the bird how to fly. Nobody's taught a fish how to swim. It just is. So without reading, you could do whatever you want to. So in that way, I think that he wanted to get back to his children what he'd learned from them. Okay? So Tia, Mark and John, who know it much better because they cannot read. And finally, I've got to say a word or two about one of the people I want to be like in some ways. I wish I could talk as well as Oscar Wilde did. Oscar Wilde is often regarded to be as one of the great conversationalists of his time. Many of the writers who met Oscar Wilde said this, how can this man talk like a god? He talks as if all of the sentences he's written all of the sentences he's speaking is something that he rehearsed all night. All of the sentences are perfect. Not simply the sentences, the paragraphs. Not simply the paragraphs, the essays that he speaks. All of these come out as if it's a book. It's not as if he's stuttering. It's not as if there's any breakage in what he's saying. All of these paragraphs flow perfectly from one another. And he wrote only one book in his life. One novel in his life. The Picture of Dorian Gray. Have you, anyone read it? No, nobody's read it. These are the introductory sentences. This is the introductory sentence of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Now, Dorian Gray is a person who comes up to one older person, and the older person says, wouldn't it be better if you could stay young throughout your life? And Dorian Gray says, wow, that would really be wonderful if I wouldn't have to get old. But remember, Dorian Gray is this wonderful guy, great figure, everybody likes him, one of the most handsome men going around in England. And he thinks, yeah, that would be wonderful. I'm so handsome, I could always be handsome. It would be such a wonderful thing. And the dream comes true. it's a tragedy of a dream come true in a lot of ways. So Dorian Gray thinks, well, wouldn't it be better if I stayed the same? And instead of me, this painting of mine would grow old. And so it happens in the novel is that the painting gets old, Dorian Gray stays the same. And all of the struggles of Dorian Gray are then reflected in the novel. So if you read the first sentence here, you'll get a sense of the artistic nature of what is to follow, okay? That it's a novel of painting, it's a novel of a studio, it's a novel work of art in a lot of ways. And one of the great essays, I mean, whenever I thought of essays, I always thought essays would be these big, long, boring sort of things that came about of 20 or 30 paragraphs or so, something like that. But after I read the essays of Oscar Wilde, I thought, essays can be written in very different manners as well. So this is an excerpt out of his Phrases and Philosophies for the Use of the Young. So he wrote this wonderful collection of one-liners dedicated to the young people. So the well-bred contradict other people, the wise contradict themselves. So have you ever read this novel called Catch-22? Catch-22? No? So Catch-22 is one of the great novels of the 20th century, especially of the war. And there is a person who's flying an aircraft, okay? He's dropping bombs downstairs and killing a lot of people. And he's tormented by this. He doesn't want to do it. And he thinks, maybe I'll go down to the army officers and say I am mad. That would be some way to solve this problem. Then I wouldn't have to do the killing. Now he's cheered up by this prospect. I'll go down. I'll simply say I'm mad, and then it's done. Then the other thought comes in his head. How can a mad person really know he's mad? A mad never really says I'm mad, so I can't really do this. This is a contradiction in other ways, okay? Your thoughts contradict with yourselves. And Wilde really wants to say that if you're really smart, your thoughts will contradict each other too. From time to time, there will be a clash between two of your thoughts, and you can't decide which is true or which is not. Dullness is the coming of age of seriousness. So whenever you become really serious about a few things, you tend to become a bit dull as well. Okay, when I was a kid, I used to take a look at my dads and moms and my other relatives, and I thought, why are these people so dull? These people are so dull. But then when you grow older, you realize that life is not always jocular. It's not always funny. It's really serious. When people die left, right, and center, when you've got the responsibility of 2 or 3 kids, and when you've got other people to look after, somebody might call in sick. Somebody might say, I don't have any money, and you've got to provide for all of these people. And life gets very, very serious. And when it becomes very, very serious, it becomes very, very dull. And I thought, there's Oscar Wilde again. So what I wanted to do through these lectures is give you a sense that something very easy, okay, without a lot of difficult words, or without a lot of difficult concepts, or without a lot of difficult sentences, you can carve something beautiful out of the ordinary, okay? So whenever you're writing whatever I've given to you, you can use very basic elements that I've given to you and carve something beautiful out of it. And try to write as daringly, as bravely, as differently as all of these people have tried. And I wish you all of the best for the project work. I really wanted to see you because I had only done lectures online, and I'm really not good at technology. I barely use a cell phone which is smart. I used to use what people refer to as dumb phones about a week or so ago, and it fell inside a toilet, and I had to buy a new one. So I'm really not good at technology, and doing the online classes is not the best of things. It just takes the human element out of it as well. So I wanted to meet you in some ways. I'd met a few Deerwalkers 7 or 8 months ago when some of them came in order to do the internship with us. It was wonderful. I don't really remember the names of them all, but Shubhashish, one of the people who were there, was there as well. So it's the second time with him. It's the first time meeting all of it. And thank you so much. You guys have been extremely patient to listen to me. And I wish you all the luck for the future.